All right. Hello, PMs. My name is Jess. We're very excited that you're watching this recording to learn a bit more about design as a project manager. So just to introduce our whole team that'll be going over the slide deck today. So my name is Jess. I'm the VP Design. And then we have Sanjana, Eden, and Janine, who are design leads. And then a little bit about the overview of what we'll be going over. We'll first go into a bit about like design thinking, overarching, just the idea, and then we'll go more into depth about the kind of design deliverables, what you should expect from your designers, how to communicate with them, and then just a summary of the takeaways at the end. So overall goals and purpose of this workshop is to help you guys understand how to think more like a designer, how to communicate with them, and then also we'll be going a bit about some of the past challenges that we've faced before about like PMs and design, and so we can learn from those. But first, I'll hand it off to Sanjana to talk a bit about design thinking.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sanjana. I'll be talking about design thinking, as Jess said. So the first thing we'll cover is why UX designers are important. So the main thing that we do is we make sure that the product that our team is creating is created for users and not the team, right? We're always making decisions that are human-centered and user-centered. And every single decision is meticulously scrutinized to make sure that that is the result. So the most important question that we ask in UX design is why? Why are you making the decisions that you are? Why are you rounding a button as much as you are? Why are you placing it in the place that you are? Those sorts of things. And it is really important as a PM to also ask your designers why, so that you understand the priority of different features. If a dev is unable to, create something, how important is it for that thing to be created and to kind of push through that roadblock, or is it okay if that kind of falls a little bit because it's not as important, right? So always ask your designers why, make sure that they are asking those questions as well. Okay, and then an overview into the difference kind of between UX and UI. There are a lot of terms on this page that may be unfamiliar to you. I recommend going through the design handbook if you don't know what some of these words are, or Googling them. But essentially, UX takes care of the function of the product, right? Like, how can I get from A to B? And how easy is that process? How easy is it for a first-time user? And things that we'll do within UX are, user flows and journeys to map out how to interact with a product, user testing to make sure it's actually good for users and not just our team. Copywriting, which is writing the words, that might be something you're unfamiliar with. And then white paper research is going to be kind of like research papers by scientists, by psychologists, cognitive scientists. And then wireframing is making the visuals of each screen or page. And then within UX, which is making sure that the whole experience is great, is UI, which primarily focuses on the visual things. So things like color, font, quarter radius, components. And they're going to make the whole product really trustworthy, because think about when you get onto a page that is has a really old UI, the first thing you're like, is this real? Is this something that I can trust? A good UI is going to make the user feel really comfortable and like they're in the right place. All right, and so the whole process happens through what's called the double diamond. This is a really iterative process, so I'll be describing it kind of linearly, but just know that it can shift, and you might be revisiting stages at different points. But usually most projects will start with a discover phase, and so you'll be talking to users about their problems, looking at competitive analysis, really just trying to find as much information about the problem as possible. It's very problem focused. We don't really think, or it's a good practice to not think about the solution during that time. Just really figure out, keep asking why, and get down to the real reasons and consequences for the problem that you're facing. And then you'll go into define, where you start to think about solutions for the problems, surface level sort of symptoms, as well as the actual kind of diagnosis for the problem. And then you'll be creating things like user flows at this point. You might have created a user persona already at the end of Discover, and a feature list as well. So you're sort of building out the skeleton for the app. And then going into the develop phase, you're going to start getting visual. So here you'll be doing maybe mid-fi to hi-fi, or usually mid-fi wireframes. You are looking at the whole kind of map of like a site map is what it's called, how you interact with the whole product, not just individual features. And then depending on the type of team and the amount of time that you have, you might be doing sort of user testing for the first time that you'll then do user testing later on once you get past hi-fi. So moving into the deliver phase, that is where you're going to be working on the design system, getting very visual, very final with everything. You'll be doing what's called prototyping to kind of give users a better feel for what the product is going to act like, as well as devs, kind of what button goes where, those sorts of things. But there's like you're very final. You'll do your last round of user testing here, finishing up any documentation that is relevant to devs, and ultimately giving it off to handoff. So that is a very brief overview of design thinking and what UX designers kind of do. We'll go into workflow and deliverables with Eden.
Awesome. Switching chairs over here. Thank you, Sanjana. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about implementing this design thinking and talking a little bit about the deliverables that your designers will complete and how do you kind of step in as the PM. So as the project manager, you are going to be the sprint lead and the task delegator for your team. You have kind of final say on decisions that are made, and you want to make sure a big theme of this overall presentation is that you want increased communication. Just a lot of talking, a lot of check-ins, and a lot of feedback back and forth from designers to PMs to developers. We're going to get a little bit into what our designers will accomplish, and we'll touch on this a little bit more later in the slide deck, but pretty much your designers are going to go through that entire design process, that double diamond. They're going to go through it all for this project, and that will take a lot of different pieces, and throughout the process, they're going to be constantly checking in with you. So here's kind of a big overview of the process that they'll go through. And as you can see with the circles, they're going to be checking in with you at every stage. During this kind of workflow, you want to make sure that they are not only checking in with you, but also checking in with the developers to discuss insights that they found from research and their final, how they prioritize the features that will be on the project, talking about feasibility of those different features, etc. So I want to see if I can highlight anything important. During each phase, you should be checking in with them and also assigning them tasks. You're going to be working with the designers to figure out what those tasks are. And we'll talk a little bit more when I talk about specific deliverables. But highlight overall, make sure everyone is in alignment for what's going on, what everyone's timeline is. And that goes for both the developers knowing what the designers are doing and what the designers are knowing what the developers are doing. All right, going a little bit more into how to define and assign deliverables. Like with your developers, you're going to be using something like Jira to set out tickets. And I want to note that design is a little more fluid and reactive. So that's why constant check-ins are needed. During the research phase, the prioritized features are going to shift from what was kind of originally noted in the brief. And so you might have to discuss with your designers how that will change the rest of the design process and how that kind of moves around different task delegations. Here's a little bit about the types of design deliverables that you could be assigning to your designers. In the discover phase, you'll touch upon user interviews, field observations, competitive analysis, everything that Sanjana touched upon earlier. And you're going to want to work with your designers to figure out if those tasks should be delegated to 2 people or the entire team or to individuals. And so make sure you work with your team members while discussing those task delegations. Overall, you don't want to be assigning your entire team just the term research. You want to be a little more specific about what you imagine your designers to be working on for the next couple days, for the week, etc. And then as they go through the process, the tasks are going to get more and more specific. So it could end up in the prototyping stage being like, all right, let's work on 5 iterations of this one user flow or this one page. And that is assigned to like one person. While in research, it could be, hey, have 2 people figure out the survey process and send that out. Let's move on to assigning tasks. Once again, usually in the research and kind of defining stages of the design process, it's going to be a lot of team collaboration, a lot of check-ins, a lot of the whole team approving a process before you start moving through user interviews, etc. But once you start, you have figured out your features in define phase. You've talked to your developers. Developers are like, thumbs up, those sound great. Your designers are going to start working on designing those screens on Figma. And often that ends up being split up in like one designer takes one feature or one workflow or one user flow. And that's usually how ownership is kind of assigned over those different screens. But once you get to that prototyping phase, that like design and prototyping phase in Figma, you'll want to have a discussion with your team on how to properly set out those tasks. Some designers might be very visually designed, skilled, and some might be more user flow focused and like interaction design. So you want to have that discussion to make sure that everyone feels like they're contributing their best. Here's a little visual for like what a roadmap could look like. You want to make, not roadmap, roadmap, a timeline. You want to make sure that you're assigning the sprints correctly, like spacing out when should user testing get done, when should prototyping get done. Make sure you work with your designers to kind of push them a little bit. This is a fast process for design teams, so feel free to push them a little on when they should get deliverables done, when they should get iterations done, but also have this understanding that design is a little more fluid and they could like hit a hiccup, and they might need some additional support from the other designers and do a little more iterative design in there. And then specifically for CodeLab, for a winter-spring quarter, this is what our project timeline often looks like. Again, people can hit hiccups, or it could go faster than normal, and the developers can start working on things late winter. It all depends on the project. But if you do need support with figuring out a project timeline or how to split up deliverables, always feel free to reach out to our education leads, and we are happy to work with you and your team to properly set out those delegations. All right, we're going to be talking a little bit about design expectations.
All right, yeah. So as Eden mentioned, so she talked a lot about super tangible deliverables that designers can be doing throughout the project. I'll kind of be expanding on just like overall what you should be expecting from designers throughout the term. So I listed a bunch of kind of terms here. They should be involved in the research stage, all of them. They should have overall very user-centered focus. They should be communicative, getting feedback, things like that. But the overall gist of this slide is kind of that, designers should know their process very well, know kind of the general steps they should be going to get this project done. But what they need from PM is kind of to bridge the gap, or one most important thing is to bridge the gap between like developers and designers. Sometimes it's designers' first time working with developers and also working with like client constraints. So making sure they know all the other things that the other stakeholders are saying so that they can best use that to inform their design decisions and how they're going to proceed with the project. Kind of as Eden mentioned, making sure each team, they know what each other is doing and vice versa. Also, encourage designers to ask questions to the devs. As I said, sometimes it's their first time working with developers, so a lot of the technical terms can often go over their heads, but they might be too scared to ask what exactly that means, so they'll kind of keep going with a half-baked understanding of what the devs are doing. So encouraging them to ask questions and making sure they know what's going on will really help throughout the process and help the communication and transparency throughout the entire term. And then some common pitfalls that we've seen and encountered in the past. Some here are delays in user interview scheduling, vague design tickets, unrealistic timelines, and a delayed design handoff process. So going through one by one. So first of all, for delays in interview scheduling, what to be aware for here is that user interviews are super important at the very beginning of the process. They really help inform designers what they need to be doing, especially for client projects. If you do have like company contacts through the client, make sure to reach out to them as soon as possible, because just natural things of getting responses and things like that can really delay the process. So that should happen as soon as possible the first couple of weeks, and make sure to align with the designers accordingly on that. Next, for vague design tickets, to help with this, it basically really helps just to know what kind of design deliverables are possible. So what Eden went over in her section, understanding the timeline for the design process and knowing, what's kind of necessary, what you need at whatever point in the process you are. So instead, of just saying like user research, be more specific. Do they need to conduct competitive analysis for X amount of companies, prepare research surveys? Being more specific on that will help with the delegation of those tasks. And then next, for unrealistic timelines, kind of similarly, if you know the design process better, it'll be easier to grasp how much time you might need for each part. And so a strong foundation understanding of that, as well as good communication with the designers, as well as between the designers and devs, will be super helpful for that. One thing you should really ensure of is that they know what features you guys are going to be implementing, and that's kind of established at the beginning, and all the different like feasibility or confusions or decisions on that should be decided at the beginning, so there isn't confusion last minute near handoff. And speaking of handoff, nearing that part in the process, making sure that the designers know when that should be, how long the developers are going to need. As I said, kind of they might not know exactly how much time they need, what exactly they might need at some point. So being clear on, if we're going to start developing the front end for like the homepage and the about page, making sure those are done and they know that's what they're going to start with. So they'll make sure to get those done in time, and they can continue making edits on other ones if they'll be implemented later. So just aligning all the timeline and things like that between the team. And then just some things I wanted to add, some kind of like organization, other things that I did when I PM'd for another project for D2D, something for our Figma file for handoff. This was like our ready to dev page that we made. And because this was a pretty big application with a lot of pages, I labeled each of the flows that we had designs for, and then also color coded based on, I think if it was ready for dev, if it was under review, or if there was an update made to it. So this helped clarify between the designers and devs in that kind of stage where we're making like small edits and kind of going back and forth. And then additionally, some things that the designers helped out with near the end, when they were kind of done with the heavy lifting of the actual pages, is doing documentation and just like client documentation for handoff. So something we did was like make this user manual. So that's something that the designers also helped with. And then at the beginning, with aligning the features and everything, we made a product requirements document. This is where all the designers, during our user interviews, we would put down kind of itemize everything that the users told us, and then categorize them between ones we were going to have, ones we might have, or ones we won't have. So the designers were very involved in this document, so it really helped with them knowing what we were going to implement, and we would review this with the rest of the team so that everyone would know what's going on. So that's kind of the overall message of that. And then I'll hand it off to Janine to talk a bit more about the communication between designers and devs.
As Eden's Sanjana and Jess mentioned, and they stressed about like effective communication. Let's talk about effective communication. So, what are some things that you should be asking your designers, and what are some things that you guys can talk about? So, two kind of like categories that kind of like talk about to like understand more about like the task and timeline. First, you guys can like talk about the progress and action items. So, like where you guys are at and how you guys are able to like move forward from like maybe the next week, and how you guys are able to like continue working on the project together as like developers and designers are like more in sync. And also talk about like what are some of the challenges and constraints that designers are experiencing, which could ultimately affect the timeline and affect like if certain aspects needs to be like have like gone back to again to like make sure that we touch bases. So yeah, make sure that we kind of like just understand like what are the challenges and constraints on both sides, and understand also like what are the developers' constraints, and what do they need from designers too. And from like understanding like what your team needs, what are some of your action items, and how can you as a PM assist your designers and developers, and how they can communicate with each other. So as Sanjana mentioned and stressed, you need to also like understand like what is the purpose of your design and designers is like decision making, and what is their process. So always ask like why to designers, like understand like what is their process. And they're always like very happy that you guys are curious about like what they are doing, and like what developers need, and just like everything else that you are curious about. So yeah, always ask why. And other than that, understand that what are your designers trying to achieve from these designs. So are they achieving project goals? Are they trying to take the key user insights from their research? Are they trying to take into consideration of like developers or the clients' needs? And as well as like talk about the development task and timeline. They should also need to know what are developers doing, what are their tasks, so that they can also align like their tasks and their timeline with designers' timeline, so they're both in sync together, and yeah, push through together. So talking more about developer and designer communication, it's so important, and Colab designers love talking with developers about their designs and how they're able to also contribute to like the developers, like how they're able to like make developers' lives easier. So also talk about these topics with between like developers and designers. So the project timeline again, their action items, and the needs, challenges, and solutions. So these should be the feasibility of the project, if these projects can be worked on, if these features can be worked on, how long it takes developers to create these, and how long it takes designers to create the solutions, and the entire process, so that designers know that they're able to create the features, and that it takes like this amount of time, and they're able to like have enough time for handoff. And of course, you guys are a team, so like have fun. Do what you guys do. Have fun with your team. Like maybe like just have spend some time together as a show as a team together, to kind of just like fun with everyone. And with clear communication, you guys have like already talked about the topics. Please document the things throughout the conversation. So please have like a shared Notion or Jira to document your conversation there, and write these things down for designers. So this should include like progress and action items. So like what are they doing for the week, and who is doing it? How long should they like take? What should you guys expect for like the next meeting? And then client needs and feedback. You just make sure that everything is documented down with clients too. So just like in case like we miss anything. So designers should be note-taking, and you should also be note-taking, as well as specifically for designers, developer needs. So what is feasible and what is not. And talking about documentation, designers should also be documenting their entire Figma like process, including like how they're organizing their Figma. So they should be organizing their Figma in terms of like which stage they are in. So those would be like the little tabs at the very left. And always refer back to user research. They can be taking their user research from Notion, or they can also be putting all of their notes inside Figma as like a little doc with everything. And yeah, make sure that you also document what are the designer decisions. And that is pretty much it for communication. But if you have anything else, if you want to also like learn more about like how, or like struggling to kind of like keep up with designers, you can also like reach out to design education leads to talk about like how you guys can like further connect together. And also, if you guys have like any terms that you have questions for, you can also reach out to the design education leads, and also like ask your designers like what are they doing too.
All right. Lastly, just to talk about takeaways, I know that was a lot of information all at once, but if you're going to take away just a couple things, these are the most important things to note down. So the first one is to know design deliverables. Along with this, just knowing timelines. This is going to help a lot with just knowing what to delegate and when, and making sure it's clear to designers and it's not just super vague and it's just leaving them to decide everything and what they need to be done. So making sure the PM is involved with that. Secondly, making sure that the development and the design teams respectively know what each other is doing and why. PMs should be checking in with both sides equally and making sure that things are aligning. The teams know what features they're doing, what the site architecture is, etc. And making sure that's happening from the very beginning. So establishing that kind of connection between the two. Thirdly, as I mentioned, aligning the dev and design timelines, especially for handoff, since that's something that designers may be a bit less familiar with. So going back to knowing the design process, being aware of how much time everything leading up to that is going to take, and then again, telling them when handoff is and making sure that they're communicating with the developers. If it would be helpful too if maybe like the design, if one designer is working on a certain page or flow, connecting that with whichever developer is working on that flow can be helpful for that part too, especially if there's like little things that may need to be changed or communicated, people know who that like point of contact might be. So just making sure there's an understanding about that and making sure that there won't be any delays for that. And then lastly is just to check in with your designers as a PM. As we stressed before, just like knowing a bit more about the design process and what designers do, what kind of deliverables they have will just, I think, will help make it more comfortable, like asking questions and checking in with them and knowing, what needs to be done and things like that. So lastly, just some resources that we get to look at. So as you know, we have Toolkit. This would be good just to look more about kind of the overall design process, from like ideation to high fidelity designs. And additionally, we also have our design bootcamp, which should be shared, but this would also be helpful just to look at what kind of resources that we already give designers. And it's also structured by the design process, so you can kind of connect the two. So it'd be good to look at that as well. So yeah, now you know how to think more like a designer. Thank you guys so much for listening. Again, feel free to reach out to us during the general meetings or through Slack. And yeah, good luck on the rest of the projects.